Sandra always said that some people walk into your life like a scene change in a movie. Suddenly, quietly, and everything feels different after they arrive. That was exactly how Keanu felt about her the day she decided, in secret, to give him something no studio, no award, no headline had ever given him before. A night where he was simply seen, loved, and celebrated. The rain had just stopped in Lowe's Angels, leaving the streets shining like wet film stock under the city lights. Inside an old brick warehouse, disguised as a low-key photography studio, Sandra Bullock paced between strings of fairy lights and half-inflated balloons, her sparkly dress rustling every time she turned. It was almost midnight. Crew members, old co-stars, stunt doubles, and a few quiet friends from Keanu's private world hid behind pillars and stacks of gift boxes, whispering, laughing nervously, checking their phones every few seconds. The air smelled like candles, pizza, and confetti, chaotic, warm, and somehow sacred. But beneath Sandra's easy smile there was tension. This wasn't just any surprise party. For weeks she'd watched Keanu move through sets and meetings with that same gentle, almost ghost-like calm. He was kind, always kind, thanking every grip, remembering every extra's name. But there was a loneliness in his eyes that most people mistook for mystery. Sandra knew better. She knew about the birthdays he'd spent alone in tiny apartments, the losses he never talked about, the way he never wanted to be the center of attention even when entire billboards screamed his name. Tonight, she wanted to change that just once and show him that being loved didn't have to hurt. She deplanned every detail like a heist. The director friend who needed a late-night reshoot. The assistant who'd pretended there was a script emergency. The stunt coordinator who'd planted Keanu's favorite old motorcycle right outside the warehouse, as if by coincidence. Inside, the walls were covered with framed photos from decades of movies, but not the glamorous posters everyone had seen 1,000 times. These were the raw shots. Keanu laughing with the sound crew in the rain, Sandra and Keanu sharing coffee between takes, a stunt double grinning with a bruised cheek and a thumbs up. Every frame was a quiet reminder. You matter to people you don't even notice you're saving. As they waited, the mood shifted from excitement to nerves. A lighting tech accidentally dropped a box of party poppers. They burst open across the floor in soft, embarrassing pops. Someone snorted, another shushed them, and Sandra's phone buzzed with a text. 10 minutes out. She exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax. This had to go right. Not because it was glamorous, but because Keanu had spent years giving away pieces of his heart, donating in secret, visiting sick kids quietly, sharing his paychecks with crews, and always shrugging it off like it didn't matter. Tonight, she wanted him to feel the weight of all that kindness coming back. What she hadn't told anyone, not even her closest friends, was that this party carried another purpose. That afternoon, she'd gotten a call from the studio. The next big action franchise they were planning. They wanted Keanu, but only if he agreed to play it their way. More violence, more harshness, less humanity. People don't want soft heroes anymore, the executive had said, laughing. They want blood and spectacle, no speeches, no feelings, just body count. The words had sat in Sandra's chest like a stone. She knew Keanu's quiet code, his line in the sand. He would rather walk away from millions than betray his sense of what a hero should be. Now, as the DJ pretended to check cables and the cake flickered with unlit candles behind a cardboard wall, Sandra replayed that call and wondered if she was doing enough. Maybe this party wasn't just about celebrating his birthday. Maybe it was about reminding him that the world still needed gentle strength, that the way he carried his pain, with humility instead of bitterness, was its own kind of revolution. She wanted him to see with his own eyes how many lives his quiet courage had already touched. The warehouse lights dimmed to a soft golden haze. Outside, tires rolled over puddles, drawing closer. A whisper shot through the room like a current. "He's here, he's here." People ducked behind curtains and stacked crates, clutching confetti cannons and cheap paper horns like secret weapons. Sandra slipped behind a pillar near the entrance, heart hammering against her ribs, her fingers trembling around the edge of a silver party hat. She suddenly felt terrified. What if he hated this? What if the attention made him shut down instead of open up? What if, in trying to show love, she accidentally dragged him back into the spotlight he'd been trying to escape? The heavy warehouse door creaked open, letting in a cool breath of night air and the faint scent of gasoline from his motorcycle. Keanu stepped inside, shoulders hunched in his usual black jacket, hair slightly wet from the mist outside. He paused, sensing something off, the strange stillness, the half-lit room, the faint shimmer of balloons just out of sight. For a heartbeat, he just stood there, scanning the shadows, his instincts sharpened by years of stunt rehearsals and late-night shoots. A man who could smell danger or deception from a mile away. What he didn't know, what no one in that room yet understood, was that the real surprise tonight would not be the cake, the candles, or even the flood of love waiting in the dark. Before the word surprise could explode from 100 throats, a single unexpected voice echoed from the far side of the warehouse, cutting through the silence and freezing Sandra in place, as if someone had just stepped onto the set who absolutely was not supposed to be there. "Don't blow it yet," he called out. "He's not supposed to see the cake from that angle." Every muscle in Sandra's body went rigid. No one was supposed to speak until the cue. Heads turned in the dark and a few guests ducked lower, thinking someone had ruined the surprise. But Keanu had already heard it. He narrowed his eyes, taking a slow step forward, his instincts shifting from confusion to quiet alert. It sounded like a director giving notes, except there was no director scheduled to be here tonight. From the shadows at the far end of the warehouse, a man in a sleek navy suit emerged, clapping slowly. He wasn't part of their circle of old friends or long-time crew. His shoes were too polished, his smile too sharp. Sandra recognized him at once and felt a thin strand of anger snap tight in her chest. Victor Hale, senior studio executive, the very voice from that afternoon's phone call. This was not part of the plan. Keanu's gaze followed the sound of the clapping. He hadn't yet seen the balloons or the framed photos or the friends hiding just behind the curtains. All he saw was a cavernous half-lit space and a studio executive walking toward him like a man who just crashed a sacred scene and felt entitled to do it. The corners of Keanu's mouth tightened almost imperceptibly. "Victor," he said simply, his tone polite but cautious, like a man who just realized the script had changed without being told. Sandra's pulse pounded in her ears. Victor wasn't supposed to know about this party, let alone be in the same room as her most private plan. She stepped out from behind the pillar, abandoning the surprise. "Lights up," she whispered to the DJ, but he hesitated, looking around in confusion. The timing was off, the rhythm broken, yet there was no turning back now. "Surprise," she shouted anyway, forcing brightness into her voice as the overhead lights flared on. The room erupted a beat too late. Confetti cannons misfired, sending glittered paper into the air in clumsy bursts. Friends leaped from their hiding spots with party horns and crooked hats, voices overlapping, laughter spilling out in uneven waves. For a second, everything felt awkward, tangled, like a stunt gone wrong. And then Keanu turned toward them. He froze, his eyes swept the room, the faces of stuntmen who'd taken falls for him, makeup artists who'd hidden his bruises for years, assistants who'd stayed late so he could have quiet sets. A camera operator waved sheepishly. Someone from the catering truck he always chatted with lifted a slice of pizza in salute. At the very back, a shy kid from a charity hospital he'd visited stood clutching a small wrapped box, eyes wide. Keanu's breath hitched, the tension in his shoulders melting into a raw, disbelieving awe. The confusion with Victor fell to the background for a moment as the sheer force of all these people being here, for him, landed in his chest. "No way," he murmured, his voice breaking just slightly. "You guys." Sandra stepped forward, suddenly shy despite the sequins and lights. "Happy birthday, you idiot," she said, smiling so wide it almost hurt. "You thought you were coming for a reshoot. You're terrible at reading scripts." Laughter rippled through the room, easing the awkwardness. Keanu shook his head, cheeks flushed, eyes shining in the warm light. He moved through the crowd, hugging people with that same gentle attention he gave on set, thanking them as if each one had done something impossible just by showing up. The room relaxed. Music slipped in under the chatter. Someone popped champagne, another lit the candles on the cake, and for a few golden minutes, everything felt exactly how Sandra had imagined. Light, joyful, full of the quiet, powerful love that doesn't need an audience. But Victor stayed near the back wall, arms folded, eyes scanning the space like a man scouting a location rather than a human heart. When Keanu reached him, he offered a quick handshake, polite but distant. "Didn't know you liked surprises," Victor said, looking around with a salesman's smile. Quite the cast you've assembled here. Feels cinematic. Sandra joined them before Keanu could answer. Her expression was cordial, but her jaw tightened just enough for Victor to notice. He wasn't supposed to, she said. This was for friends, crew, family. Ah, Victor replied, unbothered. And the people who helped turn that kindness brand into box office. Don't forget us, Sandra. He turned to Keanu, lowering his voice just enough to feel conspiratorial. Listen, I didn't come to crash. I came because we're on the edge of something huge, and I thought, what better moment to talk about it than when the man of the hour is surrounded by proof of his market value? Keanu's eyes clouded. The earlier warmth dimmed at the edges. This was exactly the kind of conversation he hated, where people translated gratitude into profit, where every thank you became a spreadsheet entry. Tonight isn't about the market, he said softly. It's about people. Victor spread his hands, feigning innocence. Of course it is, and people love seeing you fight for them, don't they? That's why this new franchise makes sense. We lean into the myth. Bigger stakes, darker world. Your character loses everything, he snaps, and he becomes what the audience secretly wants to be, untouchable. No mercy, no rules, it's honest. Sandra cut in, her tone sharpening. Honest or convenient, because it's easier to sell rage than responsibility. A few nearby guests went quiet, ears unintentionally tuning in. Keanu looked between them, conflict flickering in his eyes. He'd been here before, pulled between the truth he believed in and the machine that wanted to weaponize his image. Violence without consequence. Pain without meaning. Heroes without hearts. Victor studied them both, then leaned closer to Keanu, voice dropping. You don't have to decide now, just remember, this business doesn't reward softness forever. Audiences change. They get bored. Tonight they cheer your kindness. Next year they might not care unless you're covered in blood. This is your chance to stay on top and still pretend you're doing it for them. Those words landed like a punch. For all his calm, Keanu had his own fears, about aging out, about becoming irrelevant, about being left behind by an industry built on newness and noise. He didn't chase fame, but he knew that working gave him purpose, and purpose kept his darker nights from swallowing him whole. The idea of losing that, and of letting down the crews who depended on his jobs, twisted like a knife. Sandra saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes and felt something in her chest lurch. This was why Victor had come, not to celebrate, but to corner him when his guard was down, when his heart was open and vulnerable. She stepped closer to Keanu, her shoulder almost touching his. You don't owe them your soul, she said quietly. Not tonight, not ever. Victor smirked, tilting his head. He owes the audience a real hero, not some saint who whispers about kindness while the world burns. Before Keanu could respond, a shout rose from the center of the room. Speech! Speech! The chant spread quickly, playful and insistent. People turned toward the small platform they'd set up under a cluster of fairy lights, clapping and stomping, utterly unaware of the silent war playing out at the back of the room. Sandra squeezed Keanu's arm. Go, she urged. They're here for you, not for him. He hesitated, eyes lingering on Victor's cool, expectant gaze. Part of him wanted to disappear into the crowd, to dodge the spotlight like he always did. Another part, small but stubborn, knew that sometimes doing the hardest thing meant standing exactly where you most wanted to flee. Slowly, he stepped toward the platform. The room parted for him, like a movie scene unfolding in real time. He climbed up, hands raised in gentle protest, a humble smile fighting with nerves. The music faded. All those faces, crew, friends, that shy kid from the hospital holding his gift like a shield, lifted toward him, full of anticipation and affection. Confetti glimmered on the floor like fallen stars. From the back, Victor watched, arms crossed, eyes narrow. This, right here, was the moment he wanted to shape. Keanu took a breath, searching for words that felt true. He glanced at Sandra, who gave him a small, steady nod. Then he looked past her, at the photos on the walls, at the people who had carried him through decades without asking for anything but respect. Thank you, he began, voice uneven but sincere. I'm not very good at this. I like to hide behind characters, behind choreography, but you all came here tonight not for a character, for me, and that's honestly terrifying. A ripple of soft laughter moved through the crowd, but there were tears glinting too. He went on, letting honesty guide him, each sentence feeling like a step along a narrow, invisible bridge. You're the reason I still believe stories matter. Because I've seen how a small act on a set, a quiet moment off camera, can change someone's whole day. You remind me that being strong doesn't mean being cruel, and that being gentle isn't the same as being weak. As he spoke, Victor's jaw tightened. This wasn't the narrative he wanted. This was the opposite of the ruthless image he was trying to sell. Keanu paused, the next words pressing heavy against his tongue. Because in his pocket, weighing down his jacket, was the unsigned contract for Victor's franchise. Everyone else in the room thought tonight was about cake, candles, and nostalgia. But he knew, with a sudden, piercing clarity, that whatever he chose in the next few minutes could define not only his career, but the kind of hero people believed they were allowed to be. He glanced down at the crowd one more time, meeting the hopeful gaze of the kid from the hospital, the quiet pride in Sandra's eyes, the trust on the faces of the crew who'd followed him into storms and fire for years. And as his fingers brushed the folded pages in his pocket, he realized there was only one honest way to finish his speech, but to say it out loud, in front of everyone, and in front of Victor, would mean crossing a line he could never step back from. For a moment, the warehouse went silent, as if the lights themselves were holding their breath. Keanu's fingers pressed against the folded contract in his pocket, feeling every crease like a question. He could hear the faint hum of the speakers, the soft rustle of clothes as people shifted, waiting. He wasn't a man who liked speeches, but he could feel something rising in him now. Old memories, old pain, all the quiet choices that had led him here, to this glowing room full of faces that expected nothing from him but the truth. "I used to think," he said slowly, "that my job was just to pretend, to fall to fight to get back up when the director yelled cut. But life doesn't yell cut when you hit the ground. And the older I get, the more I realize people aren't watching us just for the action. They're watching to see how we carry our wounds." His voice softened, but every word hit with the weight of something lived, not scripted. Somewhere near the front, a stuntman who'd broken his ankle on a past movie shifted his weight, eyes suddenly bright. Sandra watched Keanu like she was seeing a side of him even she hadn't fully known, this mix of vulnerability and steel. "There were nights," Keanu went on, "when I didn't think I would get back up. Not because of the stunts, but because of life, loss, grief, loneliness, the stuff you can't choreograph. And in those moments it wasn't rage that saved me. It was the small, stubborn kindness of strangers, of friends, of people who didn't treat me like a myth but like a human being who was barely holding it together." He glanced down, almost embarrassed by his own honesty, then looked back up. "So if I'm a hero to anyone," he added, "it's not because I can throw a punch on camera. It's because I keep trying to choose kindness when it would be easier to shut down." At the back of the room, Victor's lips pressed into a hard line. The speech was drifting exactly where he didn't want it to go. He took a step forward, but Sandra moved subtly to block his path, crossing her arms. If he tried to interrupt now, he'd be the villain in a room full of people already rooting for the quiet man on the platform. "And that's why I need to say something," Keanu continued. "Not just to you, but to myself." His hand slipped into his jacket. The rustle of paper was soft but unmistakable as he pulled out the folded contract. A ripple of curiosity moved through the crowd. Even those who didn't know what it was felt the air change. "I was offered a new franchise," he said plainly. "Big one, big money, big body count." A few chuckles slipped out, but they were tense. People turned, sensing Victor like a dark planet in their orbit. "They want me to play a man who loses everything and decides the only answer is to burn the world down. No mercy, no softness, just pain and revenge until the credits roll." He held up the contract, its pages catching the light like something fragile and dangerous. "On paper, it looks incredible. Opportunity, power, security. They tell me this is what audiences want now. That kindness doesn't sell. That if I keep playing characters who believe in something softer, I'll become irrelevant, replaceable." For a heartbeat, his voice trembled. It was the first clear glimpse of his fear, exposed in front of everyone. "And I'd be lying if I said that didn't scare me. I've seen careers vanish. I've seen what it looks like when the calls stop coming. I don't want to stop working. I don't want to stop telling stories with people I love." His gaze lingered on Sandra, then moved to the grips and camera ops clustered together, the stunt team, the young crew members who depended on the next job. "I don't want to stop fighting for you." The entire room felt pulled toward him now, this man who usually ducked away from attention standing in the center of it, wrestling out loud with a choice that most people only faced in secret. Victor took another step forward, his voice cool but urgent. "Then don't," Victor called out, forcing the room to hear him. "Take the role. You can't help anyone if you disappear. Think of the charities, the crews. You turn this down, maybe next time the offer doesn't come. There's a line of younger, hungrier faces behind you, Keanu. This is how you stay in the fight." All eyes swung between them, the humble star on the platform, the executive on the floor, each representing a different future. Keanu listened, and for a second everyone could see the war in his eyes. He wasn't invincible. He was a man afraid of failing the people who relied on him, afraid of being swallowed by silence. Sandra stepped closer to the edge of the platform, her voice quietly fierce. "He doesn't have to become a monster to matter," she said, "and neither do the people watching." Victor laughed once, sharp and dismissive. "Spoken like someone whose name is safe no matter what. But some of us live in reality, Sandra. The world is angry. The box office proves what they want. They don't pay for sermons. They pay to feel powerful, even if just for 2 hours." "And what if," Keanu said, turning to face him fully, "we've just been feeding that anger instead of healing it?" The question hung in the air, heavy, electric. He looked back at the crowd, at the kid from the hospital who'd been quiet this whole time, fingers still gripping his small gift. Keanu's expression softened. "Can I ask you something?" he said gently. "What do you watch when you're having a bad day?" The boy startled at being addressed, but Sandra gave him an encouraging nod. He swallowed and raised his voice, shy but honest. I watched that old bus movie you did, the one with her." He pointed awkwardly toward Sandra, earning warm laughter. "Because you both look scared, but you still try to save everyone. You don't kill more people just because you're hurting." The simplicity of his answer cut through every sophisticated argument in the room. Keanu's throat worked as he tried to swallow the sudden emotion. "Thank you," he whispered. He turned back to the crowd, then down at the contract in his hands. His fingers tightened around it. "I don't know how long the industry will care about me," he said. "I don't know how many more chances I'll have to do this. But I do know one thing: I don't want to spend what's left of my time telling people that the only way to survive pain is to become what hurt you." With a slow, deliberate motion, he folded the contract in half, then in half again, and again. Finally, he tore it straight down the middle. The rip of paper was shockingly loud in the quiet hall. Gasps rippled through the room. Victor's face drained of color, then flushed with fury. "You don't know what you're doing," he snapped. "Do you think some sentimental moment at a birthday party is going to protect you when the calls stop? You're throwing away tens of millions, a guaranteed cultural moment, because what? You want to be liked." Keanu stepped down from the platform, still holding the torn halves in his hands. But there was a calm in him now, a strange, steady light behind his eyes. "No," he said softly, "because I want to be able to sleep." He walked over to the nearest trash bin, a cheap plastic thing by the snack table, half filled with used napkins and popped balloons, and dropped the pieces of the contract inside. No drama, no flourish, just a quiet choice made publicly so he couldn't take it back even if he wanted to. The room stayed very still. This wasn't a movie. There was no triumphant score, no perfect reaction shot. Just human beings processing what they'd just witnessed. A man choosing integrity over security, kindness over clout, right in front of them. Victor stared at the trash can like it was a crime scene. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career," he said coldly. "And don't kid yourself. The people clapping now won't pay your bills when the work dries up." A murmur of protest rose from the crowd, but Keanu lifted a hand, quieting them. His gaze was steady. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe there are still enough people out there who are tired of being told their pain only makes them dangerous. Maybe they want to see someone hurt and still choose not to hurt others back. Maybe that's the kind of hero they're waiting for." Victor opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, someone at the back started clapping. It was awkward at first, a single pair of hands fighting against the tension. Then another joined in, and another. Within seconds, the warehouse was full of applause, not wild, not hysterical, but deep and insistent, like the sound of 1,000 small vows being made at once. Sandra felt tears sting her eyes as she watched him stand there, not basking, not grandstanding, just present. A man who'd made a terrifying choice and was now standing in the aftermath, exposed but unashamed. She moved to his side, slipping her hand into his for the briefest moment, squeezing hard. "You're crazy," she murmured under the applause. "You know that, right?" He managed a crooked, boyish smile. "You helped plan this insanity." The applause slowly faded into low conversation and scattered laughter. Someone turned the music back up, a gentler track this time, warm, hopeful. People drifted toward the food, the drinks, the cake that was still waiting patiently on the table. The party began to breathe again, like a heart restarting after a shock. But the night was far from over. Victor stepped close, lowering his voice so only they could hear. There was no charm left in his tone now, only cold calculation. "You think this ends with you dropping that paper in a trash can?" he said. "You just declared a war you can't win. There are people above me who don't like being told no." When the offers slow down, when the smaller, quieter roles don't come either, when you realize you've gambled not just with your life, but with everyone who depends on you, don't say I didn't warn you. He straightened his tie, gave Sandra a tight, brittle smile, and turned toward the door. Sandra's protective anger flared. "Where are you going?" she demanded. Victor glanced back over his shoulder. "To make a few calls," he said coolly. "Enjoy your cake." He stepped out into the night, the door closing behind him with a soft finality that felt like something much larger slamming shut. Keanu watched the door for a long moment, the sounds of the party dimming around him. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a heavy, sobering awareness of what he'd just done. He'd chosen his soul over his safety, and for the first time, the full cost of that choice started to flicker at the edges of his mind. Behind him, the guests laughed and chatted, oblivious to the storm that might already be forming outside those brick walls. The candles on the cake flickered, waiting to be blown out, tiny flames holding fast against the dark. Sandra stepped closer, her voice low but steady. "You know this could get ugly," she said. "They can freeze you out, whisper in the right ears, make you look difficult." "I know," he replied. "So what are you going to do when that happens?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes traveled over the photographs on the wall, the crew, the friends, the moments of unexpected grace caught between takes. Then he looked at the shy kid from the hospital, standing alone now, the untouched present still in his hands. "I guess," Keanu said softly, "I'm going to find out what kind of man I really am when there's nothing left to hide behind." He started walking toward the kid, toward the cake, toward the people he'd chosen over power. The music swelled just a little, the colors of the room deepening into something rich and almost unreal. And somewhere outside, as Victor Hale dialed the first number on his phone with practiced ease, a different kind of story began. A story about what happens when you dare to hold on to your humanity in a world that keeps trying to buy it. Inside the warehouse, as Keanu knelt to accept the kid's gift with the same tenderness he'd given Oscar, a faint vibration buzzed in his pocket. A new message. A name he didn't expect to see tonight. And the first words on that screen would change the meaning of everything he had just risked. Sandra noticed the way Keanu's hand paused over his pocket, how his eyes flicked down with a confusion that didn't match the warmth of the moment. He'd just knelt in front of the kid from the hospital, accepting a small, carefully wrapped box decorated with shaky marker drawings of a bus and a smiling stick figure version of him, and Sandra holding hands. "It's not much," the boy said, cheeks reddening. I made it in art therapy. They said I should give something to someone who makes me feel brave." Keanu smiled, the kind of smile that seemed to fold a whole lifetime of gratitude into one expression. "Hey," he said gently, "that's not much. That's everything." He took the gift with both hands as if it were glass, but the vibration in his pocket came again, insistent, tugging him back toward the strange, precarious future he'd just chosen. He slipped the present into Sandra's hands for a moment. "Hold this for me?" he asked softly. "Sure," she replied, studying his face. "You okay?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, pulling out his phone. One new message, an unsaved number but a name in the text itself. From Leela, assistant to MR. Her boss's initials were enough to freeze him in place. MR. He'd admired MR from a distance for years. A fiercely independent director who'd walked away from the studio system when they tried to turn her war film into a glossy recruitment ad. She was notorious for making raw, humane stories that didn't always make a fortune, but always left people different than before they'd watched them. The kind of films that lived in your bones, not just your weekend. He opened the message, heart pounding. Hi Keanu, sorry to text you out of the blue. MR just saw the live clip from your party. Didn't know you were turning down Victor's franchise. She asked me to tell you this. If he's really walking away from the blood opera, tell him I have something better. A story about a man who loses everything and decides not to burn the world but rebuild a corner of it piece by piece. If you're interested, she wants to meet. Tomorrow. No studio, no executives, just coffee. Keanu stared at the screen, the words blurring for a second as emotion pricked unexpectedly at his eyes. He hadn't even realized someone had recorded his speech, let alone streamed it. Of course someone had. This was the age they lived in. Nothing stayed inside four walls for long. But for once, that reality hadn't twisted his choice. It had magnified it. Sandra watched his face change, the surprise, the reluctant hope softening the edges of his fear. "What is it?" she asked quietly, leaning closer so no one else would hear. He handed her the phone. She read the message, her lips parting in disbelief. "No way," she whispered. "MR, you're kidding." He shook his head, almost laughing at the absurd timing. Apparently Victor's not the only one who watches everything. Sandra's gaze flashed to the trash can where the torn contract lay buried under napkins and balloon shreds. "You understand what this means, right?" she said. "You walked away from a story about revenge, and the universe basically handed you one about healing." "It's just a text," he said softly, though there was a quiet wonder in his voice now. "Could fall apart tomorrow, could be nothing." "You don't believe that," she replied. "Not really." He looked around the room. The lights, the laughing guests, the kid from the hospital now showing his drawing to a stuntwoman who pretended to be impressed by every line. The scent of cake and wax and cheap champagne floated in the air, warm and imperfect and impossibly human. "You know what's crazy?" he murmured. "Even if this wasn't real, I'd still be glad I tore it up." Sandra searched his face, testing the truth of that. What she saw there wasn't bravado or performance or some martyr complex. It was relief, deep bone-level relief, like a man who had finally stopped holding his breath. "Then text her back," she said, "before Victor convinces the internet you were drunk or insane." He laughed low and genuine, the sound loosening something in his chest. "Good point." He started typing, fingers moving slowly, carefully. "Hi, Leela. Please tell MR thank you for watching and for not giving up on stories that don't need explosions to matter. I'd be honored to meet." He hovered over the send button for half a second. It wasn't fear anymore, it was reverence. Then he hit send. Message delivered. He locked his phone and slipped it back into his pocket, the weight of it somehow lighter now. When he turned back, the kid from the hospital was watching him with big, curious eyes. "Did you get bad news?" the boy asked tentatively. Keanu knelt again, accepting the small gift back from Sandra. He peeled the paper slowly, taking care not to tear the child's careful drawings. Inside was a tiny clay figure, crooked, imperfect, but unmistakable. It was a little man standing in front of a bus, arms stretched wide as if trying to stop it with sheer will. "I got the right kind of news," Keanu said softly. "You made this." The boy nodded. "I know you do action and stuff," he said, "but my therapist says real bravery is when you're scared and you still try to help people. So I made you not kicking or shooting or anything, just standing in front of danger and trying to make it stop." Keanu's throat tightened. He looked at the tiny clay figure, then at the boy. "Thank you," he managed. "I think I needed this more than you know." He stood, carefully placing the figurine on the cake table beside the candles. It looked almost comical there, a lopsided guardian watching over a ring of flickering lights. But to Keanu, it felt like a tiny monument to the choice he'd made. Sandra clapped her hands together, pulling the room's attention back before the mood could drift into something too heavy. "All right," she called. "Before someone sets off another confetti cannon in the bathroom, can we please do the one thing every normal birthday party manages in the first 10 minutes? "Cake," someone shouted. The crowd surged toward the table, forming a loose, affectionate semicircle around Keanu. The DJ turned the music down and switched tracks to a gentle piano version of Happy Birthday. It was corny. It was perfect. Candles glowed, casting warm light across faces still damp with the remnants of earlier tears. Keanu stepped up, hands tucked into his pockets, suddenly shy again. The room began to sing, off-key, overlapping, too loud in some places, barely a whisper in others. The kind of singing you only get from people who aren't performing for anyone, just being themselves. As the final "To You Woo" stretched and broke apart into laughter, Sandra leaned close, her voice a low thread only he could hear. "Make a wish," she said. He stared at the candles, each one a tiny, stubborn flame. Wishes had always felt dangerous to him. They implied control he knew he didn't have. Life had taught him that much beautiful things could vanish with no warning, but tonight felt different, not safe exactly, but honest. He didn't wish for more movies, or fame, or even peace. Those things were too big, too brittle. Instead, he closed his eyes and made a small, fierce wish. "Let me keep choosing the right thing, even when I'm scared, and let it matter to at least one person who needs it." He opened his eyes and blew out the candles. Smoke curled upward, soft and ghostly, as the room burst into cheers and laughter. For a brief moment, lit only by the afterglow of the sparks, Keanu felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness. Something deeper. Belonging. The party shifted into an easy rhythm after that. Music, laughter, people sharing stories from old sets and near disasters, each anecdote another thread tying everyone closer. Stunt performers reenacted ridiculous fight choreography with plastic forks. A makeup artist confessed she'd once drawn a tiny heart where no one would ever see it under his costume armor, just to remind herself he was human under all that myth. At one point, a playlist glitch swapped out the cool indie track for an absurdly upbeat 80s dance song. Instead of fixing it, Sandra grabbed Keanu's hand, dragging him into the impromptu dance floor. "No," he protested, laughing. "Absolutely not. I do fake fighting, not real dancing." "Tonight," she said, spinning anyway, "you're allowed to be bad at something." He let go, awkward, loose, joyful, not caring who might be filming or judging. People cheered as he stumbled through half-remembered moves, tripping over his own feet and laughing so hard he had to stop and catch his breath. For a man who'd spent his life perfecting control on camera, there was something almost revolutionary about looking so foolish and not caring. Hours slipped by, the night deepening outside. One by one, guests hugged him goodbye, each farewell quieter, more intimate than the last. The warehouse slowly emptied, leaving behind only soft music, twinkling lights, and the gentle mess of a night well-lived. Empty glasses, scattered confetti, footprints in glitter. Eventually, it was just the two of them, Sandra and Keanu, standing amid the wreckage of celebration. "You know," she said, leaning against a table, heels dangling from her fingers, "I've thrown a lot of parties in my life. Some of them had better playlists. But this might be the only one that could get a man blacklisted and saved in the same night." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You think I'm really going to get blacklisted?" "I think," she replied, choosing her words carefully, "there are going to be doors that close, yeah. There always are when you say no to power. But I also think the doors that open will be the ones you really want. The ones you can walk through without leaving pieces of yourself behind." He grew quiet, turning that over. "What if I get scared later?" he asked. The honesty of the question made it feel almost like a confession. "What if there's a day I regret it?" "Then call me," she said simply. "We'll watch something terrible, eat garbage food, and I'll remind you that you set a room full of people on fire tonight without hurting a single soul. And if you still regret it after that, we'll deal with it then." He nodded, a small, grateful smile touching his lips. "Thank you for this, for all of it." She shrugged, though her eyes were shining. You've spent your whole career jumping in front of imaginary buses for people. I figured you deserved one night where someone did that for you." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching a stray balloon drift lazily near the ceiling. Outside, the city murmured, unaware that anything remarkable had happened within these walls. His phone buzzed again. This time the notification was short, simple. From Leela, assistant to MR. "Got your message," she says. "Good, I don't work with cowards. Let's see if he's as brave on set as he is at birthdays. 10 a.m. at Cafe Aurora, don't be late." Sandra read it over his shoulder and grinned. "Well," she said, "looks like tomorrow you start building that corner of the world instead of burning it." He laughed softly, pocketing the phone. "One corner at a time," he said. "That's all any of us can do, right?" They began to clean up together, not because they had to, but because it felt right, scooping confetti into trash bags, stacking plates, blowing out the last of the forgotten candles. There was something humbling and grounding about ending an emotionally seismic night with something so ordinary. As they worked, Sandra glanced at him. "You know, people are going to talk about what you did tonight." "Yeah," he said. "Victor made sure of that." "I don't mean the executives." She shook her head. "I mean the kid, the crew, the ones watching from their couches, wondering if there's still room in this world for softness that doesn't break, for strength that doesn't crush. You didn't just turn down a movie, Keanu. You gave them permission to believe they don't have to become the worst version of themselves to survive." He looked at her, letting the weight of that sink in. "Do you really think stories can do that?" She smiled, tired and sure. "They're the only thing that ever has." They turned off the last of the lights together. The warehouse fell into a peaceful dimness, the faint glow from the street spilling in through the high windows. Before they stepped out into the cool night air, Keanu glanced back once more. The tiny clay figure still stood by the cake table, arms stretched wide, guarding nothing and everything at once. He walked over, picked it up, and tucked it carefully into his jacket. "Souvenir?" Sandra asked, holding the door. "Reminder," he said, "that even when things get loud and ugly, I already chose who I want to be." They stepped out into the sleeping city. The door closed behind them with a soft, final click, but this time it didn't feel like something ending. It felt like a cut to a new scene, a smaller one, quieter, but somehow more important than anything the studios could script. In the days to come, Victor would make his calls. Articles would appear with pointed headlines. Some people on the internet would call Keanu foolish, others would call him brave. Offers would shift, some vanishing, some arriving from unexpected corners. But somewhere between all that noise, in a little cafe where the coffee was too strong and the chairs didn't match, a director who believed in hearts more than explosions would slide a script across a table to a man who'd chosen to walk through fear instead of around it. And years later, when people watched that film on lonely nights, when they saw a character break and then slowly, stubbornly start to rebuild, not with bullets, but with patience and small, relentless kindness, they wouldn't know about the confetti-covered warehouse or the torn contract in a plastic bin. They would only feel something inside them loosen, something dark and heavy letting go. Maybe they'd be a kid in a hospital bed, maybe a stunt performer with an old injury, maybe a burned-out executive secretly craving a different kind of story. Whoever they were, they would see a man on screen who was bruised, scared, and still choosing not to become what hurt him. And they would learn, quietly, powerfully, that courage isn't always the loudest punch or the biggest explosion. Sometimes courage is saying no when the whole world expects yes. Sometimes it's standing in front of the metaphorical bus with shaking hands and a soft voice, whispering, "I won't move, not this time, not like this." And somewhere in all that, they'd understand what Sandra Bullock had really given Keanu Reeves that night. Not a party, not even a second chance. She'd given him space to remember that in a world obsessed with shock and spectacle, the bravest, most revolutionary thing a person can do is choose to stay kind,